Today is June 17th, 2025, and we're here focused on a digital world town hall meeting. As it always goes, we're going to focus on a real quick agenda of reporting out the different things that occurred this last week as it ties to, any kind of development topics or operational topics, and then focus on any kind of questions. We are joined by a live audience from really all around the world. So from even though there's not tons of folks, there's a very good diversity of folks that are very consistent, and we're grateful for their attendance. We're also grateful for those that are here in a moderation standpoint, and also I want to excuse Wally as well this week, but we're grateful for Adam and John for all that they do. As a reminder, this is a private membership association. Some of the things we may talk about might be forward looking. For those that need a recap, we're focused on helping the secret combinations that are behind the scenes, pulling strings. If some of us kind of feel like, wow, there's a repeat in history, or that sounds familiar, or that just seems interesting, or pops more questions, there are secret combinations behind the scenes in different parts of the world, and they usually collaborate and they usually tie into monetary systems. And when I say monetary systems, I'm talking about systems that are also related to governmental systems and really just control over others. And they usually tie to centralized systems. A lot of this stuff started before digital technology came about. And the reality is when centralized systems meet technology, right? Like today we're talking about electronic money, and tomorrow we're going to talk about cryptographic digital money. And when all of that stuff comes together, it's going to be literally enslavement. So we're grateful for those that are paying attention, for those that understand these things, and are part of the solution. We see decentralization at the center of that solution, and really intelligently organized technology that can help facilitate that for humanity. And so we're grateful for those not only that build the technology historically, not even directly on the Clear teams or the Digital World teams, but those that actually dedicated their lives. Linus Torvald is a good example. He built one of the first operating systems on the server side that enabled really the open source software technology model to actually be realized. We look at software that's open source as like living the law of consecration in software development, but then we look at other folks. A gentleman named Scott, I won't go into the details. He's also from Utah. You're going to hear Utah a couple different times today, but he's from Utah, and he's mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper 4 or 5 times. And really, genealogy is what he deployed um, the proof point around. And it's really simple for those that may think they just don't understand blockchain or crypto or cryptography or decentralization. Really, all it is, think about this. Like this last week, I went to a funeral. A grandfather, wonderful man, 92 years old, lived a full life, and really had a celebration of life. But when we went through it, they actually printed in newspapers, multiple different newspapers, his obituary, who he was, where he was born, where he died, what his next of kin, what the family was, maybe a couple things about his life. This individual served a couple missions around the world, where he went, just those types of things. And, the dates are also very important. And then you also see that on tombstones as well. Well, when it goes in one paper and then another, those are proof points. And those proof points that someone actually had a transaction or did something, passed away, that's actually how the Bitcoin white paper was actually targeted to a use case around blockchain. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that actually works. But for those of you that may think I don't know anything about Bitcoin, or it's really a very simple thing. It's just proving that something happened and then using math to actually verify that it actually happened. So with that being said, we're going to talk a little bit about what we talk about with math. The math turns into a key. The key turns into 12 words. The 12 words is linked to the individual. The individual then has derived keys that's kind of a combination of them as an individual and the actual 12 words, which then creates their identity. And it's not just a social platform. So some parts of the world this last week, I've had a lot of, well, in the last couple, I guess say last month, conversations around an act in Utah, around a digital act, a digital choice act, which we'll talk about. There's 3 different acts that are important that are making waves and actually going to be a part of the future. But it also ties to not just social profiles, which that act ties to, but many other things. Maybe it's a wallet. Maybe they're different apps. Maybe they're all your passwords. Maybe it's court records. Maybe it's something to do with how you're parenting or have been parented. Maybe it has to do with how you searched, or maybe health, or maybe data points around photos or where you went, etc. All of these things are what we call digital exhaust or data exhaust. And there's derived keys that can be built on them. What if you want to start a business? What if you want to have a child? What if you want to get married? What if you want to purchase land? All of these are different use cases that have derived keys that can basically enable the future. Why is it valuable? Well, the future is going to be tied to artificial intelligence in a very material way. When I say material, I'm talking about an imperative way where if humanity doesn't understand, or at least come up with an alternative solution or a path that is a parallel path to the existing centralized systems where people can actually own who they are, verify who they are, then there's literally going to be enslavement. This isn't anything new. It's like we've seen enslavement through generations of time in lots of different dispensations in lots of different countries. It's not just one race over another race or one gender over another gender. But what we're going to see is a clash where a digital ability, for instance, and I'm not going to say that certain elections were swayed or were fraudulently polled. Those that can be your choice based upon your own due diligence. But when digital systems meet policy or voices that are not cryptographically, and what I mean by that are not guaranteed, verified, then shenanigans can be played. And when those shenanigans get played and systems get taken over, that's when society really struggles. And the digital world plays this pivotal role of connecting in the digital and the physical through this decentralization enablement, so to speak. And that's really what this is all about. Some of the other things we'll talk about are sustainability so that future generations can have a future that's really beautiful. I think that all of us on this call today, we live in an amazing time. Like, we have comforts that they didn't have 100 years ago. We have, and I would even say some of the blessings that we live with are actually also curses, but they're different conversations. Today I actually told one of my sons, I said, I looked at his watch. I was playing chess with him, and he had this watch on that was this old dinosaur. The old watches like that you almost have. It's not the calculator watch, but it came out in those time frames. I swear it's probably 30 years old. Like, this was, anyways. And I said, and he doesn't use a phone, and he just doesn't. He just lives life. And I said to him, I said, I'm really. I said, I don't know if it was grateful or proud, but I said, I just appreciate that you enjoy life. You enjoy the moments of life, whether it's a next meal and what it tastes like, or the simple ability of the weather. It's just really refreshing. And so it was an eye opener to me to think, well, was that something that I instilled in him as his father, that he looks at technology that way and doesn't live his life around it? Because I can't say that that's all my kids or that generation. That's what they do, but I don't know. There's just a lot to be said there. And then later on in the day, he came in and he says, Dad, what happened to that Clear GM stuff that you were working on? And now that AI is out, because we were really working on it hard with machine learning and artificial intelligence, like 3 years ago, we ended it, started it like 8 years ago. And I thought to myself, it would actually be a very different animal if we lit it up now, because not only can you verify sites and individuals, but you can actually validate so many other and solve so many other things around deep fakes. But the point that I'm trying to articulate here is the physical side of life and the sustainability side of life is for future generations. And the connection with this decentralized element is really what the digital world and some of the endeavors that we're focused on. So again, I'll just reiterate, decentralized identity, decentralized keys, then ties into the payment world, which, if we haven't seen things go sideways, I'm going to point out a couple different things here real fast. And I'm actually going to have to do it on a different system so that everyone can see it and hear it, so that we don't have other issues. Let's see here. Give me just a quick second. Now, she went on to go and create a little video that basically goes into an event, and I won't go through it. I'll leave it in a link that everyone can watch, but it goes into an event. And what it does is she tries to use money, she tries to use cash. And they basically say, you can't do that here. Well, what are my options? Well, you can go over and stand in that line. So there's basically the lines to buy stuff, there's nobody in, but the lines to be able to convert cash into a card that they can then spend on. And then she analyzes the card and she analyzes how there's a fee on the card every month, and how if you don't use it over a certain period of time, it goes away. And really, what we're talking about goes back to what I was trying to articulate up here around these different private and public systems that tie to a monetary system that ties to IMF, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Reserve Bank, all of it is basically around creating something that then disappears if you don't use it. It's programmable money. And why we talk about these payments, it's very key to the future. It's a critical element that's going to tie to it, as well as some of the other policies that are coming out. The things that we're focused on within the digital world today, at least this week, this whole year, so to speak, but we measure by the week, is an exchange, phones, homes, autos, and community. The primary focus and advancements that we're currently adhering to and focused on right now is letting the exchange development continue and focusing on community, as well as some elements around connecting physical communities to digital communities. And so we'll go into some of the details there. Some of the things that the development teams are currently focusing on is interoperability with other types of development languages so that SDKs can actually be given to anyone in the world that has a login system. So historically, we've worked a lot on Angular, which is a technology that comes out of the Google ecosystem as a framework, as well as Android on the mobile side of it. And we're tying over to other technologies. And I will just, whether they're tied to other frameworks, namely specifically a Facebook framework, which we'll get into in the future. But there's a lot of technology that's being developed right now that's tying to that. And we look forward to showing you some of the systems. Some of the other things that we're working on is basically a new type of stage, a new type of center, a new type of community, and a new type of ranch that's all tied together in an environment where it's about almost 1,200 acres, and it's got its own systems, it's got its own roads, it's got its own sewage, it's got its own fire infrastructure and fire department, it's got its own agriculture, there's a couple hundred horses, there's 100+ homes already today, and a couple hundred homes that will go in the future, ranging from small little simple, value-based homes to luxury high-end homes. There's lots of trails, it's on its own mountain range, and it's a wonderful part of the world, but ultimately, how does it actually govern itself? How are the individuals that are tied to this free? How does this type of futuristic system actually get to enable technology or a digital system to add value? For instance, you have homeowners associations that have different questions that come up and management things that need to occur. But then there's always someone that feels like they weren't heard and equality that wasn't realized. You could say the same things with voting systems within different types of elections and other elements. But what if the digital world could actually cryptographically, so mathematically, guarantee that everyone, based upon really who they are, what they've been involved with, maybe it's a decentralized company, maybe it's a digital company, maybe it's just a general company, but it has a reputation. They have a reputation. The assets that they actually create, the currencies that they use to pay with, all of them have a different currency. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the advancements there. That's on the physical side of things. That's not a core competency within the digital world, but what's beautiful is there's a wonderful team of folks that have actually spent well over a year building these different environments from a design standpoint for the future, based upon massive work that's been done from a team of folks and some really wealthy individuals that wanted to create a private community and then possibly a private township and then possibly more. So we look forward to continuing to give you updates based upon that and kind of the advancements there. We're going to talk a little bit about the advancements within the actual exchange environments and some of the technologies that are actually popping there and coming to fruition. The Utah Gold Exchange, the Utah Stock Exchange, there's advancements with both of those systems. The ability to procure different assets with normal USD, which historically we have always deterred from, but we believe 2025, with a lot of the different legislation that's happening, is actually the timing is now. So the ability for, and I'm going to go through a couple of these different things. So we won't talk a lot about. I'm going to talk actually about three different things. So this is the treasurer for Utah, Mr. Oaks, Mrs. Oaks, Marlo Oaks. So Utah is the first nation with legislation to pass for basically vendors to be paid in silver and gold. And so a lot of the things you see at this digital ranch will actually do things all in silver and gold. And for those of you that, you see, actually, I'll pull over. For those that may not see a video stream, I'm going to show you, and actually I'm going to come over here because I can't actually see it. Uh-oh. There we go. So this is basically an example of the future of this. So historically, we look at what we call greenbacks versus goldbacks. And the difference is, you notice how you kind of have a different texture to it. This is paper, and this is actually gold. So you can
I can't see you, Michael.
Oh shoot. Let's see if I can get over there for you. Sorry, I didn't turn this on earlier. I don't know if you can still see. If you can't see, just find one of the social channels. But these are basically the latest. This is actually the latest stack of gold assets that have come from the state of Florida. There's 7 states that are actually issuing this. Utah was actually the first state, and now there's 7 states. And a lot of that was passed based upon the legislation that you're seeing updated here. Now, the legislation I'm talking about here is 2025. This was in March. And when you really dig into silver and gold as a currency or as legal tender, the state of Utah actually put it in its originally incorporated documents in its constitution when it was actually created long ago. So silver and gold have actually, and from what I understand, Utah, I want to say Tennessee, these are basically the 2 states that actually have those types of law built into the actual legal framework. And this is actually extending it further, where the state of Utah will actually take holdings and allow payments, whether it's for sales tax, property tax, use tax, income tax, you name it. But this is around payments in silver and gold. The next one is around decentralized autonomous organizations, which for those of you that know, the digital world is one of the only organizations in the world that actually creates decentralized autonomous organizations in the true sense of cryptographic keys that can actually have derived, and you don't even have to have the derived side of it. Nobody's even doing it without the derived side of it to the same level. But imagine if you can actually go to the digital world and you can log in and you can actually go, and for those of you that this may be new for, I'll actually show you. I'm going to grab what's called a Life app on my phone. It's going to use derived keys to basically find my identity, so it validates who I am. And then it's actually going to log in with a QR code instead of a username and password through 5-factor authentications, 5 factors that I as an individual know and own and control, not a third party. And then if I want to create a business, let's say I want to create a community, I can actually go ahead and scan it again. And what this is actually creating the derived keys in real time, but doing it in such a way where I as the individual can actually validate. So if I were actually to create this incorporation, these keys here are derived keys for this particular company that would be created. I'll go back and show you an example of one that was actually already done. So let's go in and look at this guy here. So this is what the world would actually see. Oh, so this is, John, would you do me a favor and snag, this would actually go to G2. Could you just create a task on that for G2? John? So basically what we're looking at is an interface where you create a business and then you can create other assets. So as you create other assets, you can tie those assets to you. And it's not just your identity and your company or your assets, but all of this stuff ties around legislation that is actually real world. So real laws in a real state that really honors these things. So these are 3 laws and legislation that's actually being passed and shaped within the state of Utah. So this particular one is what they call the Digital Choice Act. And this is particularly around the mobility capabilities for an individual to actually have their own data and identity that they can actually own and control. And some of these providers already provide pieces of it, but it's not mobile. And actually, in the health world, with HIPAA, Health Information Portability and Privacy Act, they legislated a policy to do the same thing with an individual's data as they go through the medical system, but it actually ended up being just the opposite. The individual goes and jumps around to multiple different vendors and dumps their data into their systems, which is absolutely the wrong and the opposite way to do it. But the goal for this is just the opposite, where the different systems use a protocol. So we're in the medical system, it's called HL7, which was all implemented the backwards way. And in this environment, it's actually supposedly, if they don't actually give the individual their own data by a certain period of time, then they can have some financial liability, like $200 per instance of actual each issue. This is similar to what's happened within GDPR with the European Union around how they said, hey, you're not going to take our data from our citizens. And if you do, we're basically going to fine you this thing. And all you have to do is ask anybody that's browsing your site to say, I agree to these cookies or not. And then you are actually out of the hook. But along the way, you had organizations like Apple. They're currently under a massive suit. It's one of the largest ones globally. Marriott, certain churches, I won't be specific, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. All these companies have paid $5 billion to $100 million, and they actually paid it out. They actually paid to the European Union. For those of you that are not aware, the Pacific Union actually has a thing called DDPR. Instead of GDPR, it's actually around digital data protection that actually is specifically around the individual not only having a social platform, but having a platform for their identity, because it's a human right not just to be able to have a social platform or use a certain currency, but to be able to have privacy. Not only privacy, but the right to travel and the right to transact. And so this actually went out, for those that were paying attention, this literally went out almost 2 years ago now, and it was actually, this date was when it actually went into effect. And what you start seeing is legal cases that start coming out against organizations that actually don't follow the simple structure that's put out there. And people may say, well, I don't understand the structure, I don't understand the act. Well, this is it spelled out. People can go through it, they can see how it works, and it's their responsibility to actually conform with it. And what's beautiful, it's not just the Pacific Union or the digital world, but the state of Utah is basically applying those same types of meaty actions, if you will. And then you'll start seeing legal enforcement that actually is going to start getting hit come the first of next year. So let's see, actually, laws is set to take effect July 1st, 2026. So almost just under a year from now. So huge things coming on these three topics. And when we talk about these, we're also talking about setting up a digital infrastructure from a digital community, a digital culture. And that's some of the things we're talking about, not just with the Utah Stock Exchange, but also with the different community centers that we're talking about, the stages, the communities, the ranches, the ability for people to actually govern themselves. Like right now in the state of Utah with the same environment, there's actually a legal lawsuit going on because people haven't had their voice heard. They've had their rights taken away from them to actually be heard. Some of the other stuff we're doing, and this isn't directly related to the digital world, but the clear companies are looking to basically move into a different type of environment as we prepare for the Olympics within Utah within about 10 years from now. So there's a lot of moving parts that we're currently working on physically, where historically everything that we've been building is all from a digital standpoint. How is it actually crafted online? But then there's a reality around how, and for those that are not seeing online, I'm holding up the gold backs again, how we actually interact with cash versus what I would call tender, real tender. So capital gains doesn't exist. The same types of taxation doesn't exist. Tariffs don't exist, and you can get your own tax advice and tariff advice, but the reality is all you have to do is go and look at what the actual Treasury Department is actually saying today. So with that being said, there's a lot of updates that we've kind of gone through. One of the things that I would love to propose inside of this meeting, since we're about a year off per se, is actually implementing the Digital World's Digital Choice Act. So going through and actually framing this up, I know there's a couple folks that are on this call that care about these simple types of things, but how can the digital world actually adopt the same types of act and structure as the Digital Choice Act within the state of Utah, parallel that up, and then implement the systems that tie directly to that? So it's one thing to have policy, it's another thing to watch it get implemented. HIPAA is a perfect example of that. So when we look at, I'm just going to pull up a website. I'm going to go to clear.co.com. I'm going to click on leadership, and I'm going to talk to you a little about a wonderful man. Oh no, let's see here what I do. This is Richard here, and Richard is actually a very unique experience where he's got an interesting history in computer science, as well as math, as well as physics. But he was the gentleman who actually wrote the policy for not just the United States of America, but also the Canadian health environment to actually create the architecture for HIPAA. So Health Information and Portability and Privacy Act was actually supposed, notice that it's an act, kind of like this other Digital Choice Act that we're talking about. But what happened back in the day was he wrote the policy, but he didn't write the technology. And so the importance around the digital world is to actually ensure that this technology frees humanity and liberates humanity instead of enslaves them. Richard and I have known each other since 2004, so 20, what is that, 10, I don't know, 20 something years, 21 years. And about 2009, 2010, he came to my office and he said, Mike, I'm retiring. I'm not focused on these things anymore. And we've got these patents, and all of this was totally implemented wrong. And it has to change. And we're going to give you these patents, and we've watched what you're doing. We're going to entrust you and the team within the Clear companies. And at this time, this was a little bit before the digital world, the Declaration of Independence or the Declaration of Unity was actually announced and came out. But he basically said, you've got to make sure that the policy that's created for what happens in the future systems isn't centralized, and the technology goes with the policy. And so in the state of Utah, we see this beautiful policy around the Digital Choice Act, around the Decentralized Autonomous Organization Act, and the abilities to actually create a company or an organization that actually can use keys and derived keys, and then how that actually ties to the ability to tie into payments. So imagine identity, imagine organizations and reputations, and then payments. I know that may not be making sense in your mind, but I'm going to go back up to a simple slide and point out how all of this comes together. So you have identity, keys, which tie to really everything that we do. It's not just companies. It's not just a decentralized autonomous organization. It's like, how do I actually buy a car? How do I register a car? How do I get married? How do I have children? How do I get birth certificates for children? How can the children's then govern my assets when I pass away as an individual? How can all of this stuff come together around the individual, not a centralized system? So there's a couple different systems that have been rolled out over the years. One of them is Ethiopia. And Ethiopia actually has a digital, they're doing some really cool stuff within the digital environment. I won't go through all the details here, but what I will talk about is there should be this interface here. So imagine the individual inside the center of all of these different types of systems, whether it's social media, whether it's source data providers, whether it's data that you have. Maybe it's something that was given to you. Maybe it's a photo of a family member and you took it and it's a genealogy. Maybe it's banks, maybe it's taxes, maybe it's health records, maybe it's some form of social XYZ, maybe it's what you search, maybe it's the phones and the data that's tied to the phones, maybe it's the apps on the phones, maybe it's prescriptions or healthcare records or payments. All of that stuff ties around the individual in the future, around a life app. So in this particular case, this is digital life that is within the Ethiopian environment. So the laws of the jurisdiction, whether it's a country, a kingdom, a state, a province, a county, a community, you name it, the ability for individuals to actually own their own identity, their own voice, their own data, and be able to move. And when we talk about this, we're talking about the complexities. Like, we actually spent almost 5 years developing a phone and an operating system and 16 apps that basically give the individual and the user the ability. So these are the particular apps for those that can actually see my screen or my camera. So these apps are not just the social platform. So when we look at this law here in Utah around the Digital Choice Act, that's around social media. But there's a bigger topic to be had. What about photos? What about assets? What about the ability to have your email be private? Or maybe your contacts, or maybe data inside of your contacts, maybe a unique address, maybe the ability to actually take something and convert it from maybe a trust, a digital trust that has a digital asset in it that can actually be managed and pushed from one generation to another generation. So what if you actually wanted to say, for instance, this last week I went to a wonderful, I wouldn't call, it was a funeral, but it was actually a celebration of life. But sometimes people can't plan for that. Like this gentleman, 92 years old, he knew 10 years ago that it was, his days were numbered, but he served others. He gave things. He prepared. But are the rest of us prepared? And I'm not going to talk about the craziness in life. We all know that there's wars and calamity and rumors of wars and craziness that's going out there, whether you're talking about China and Taiwan or Israel and Iran or you name it. I mean, the conflicts are there, but we as individuals actually have our own life. We have our own choices, but we don't have a system that can actually allow us to be able to create our own identity. So imagine this nucleus within the state of Utah based upon these three beautiful laws tied to the ability to have an identity, personal keys that tie to everything, not just in this generation, but for future generations. Really, we're talking about a system for a genealogy, for generations to come, for posterity, because that's really where the wealth is. It's not in an asset of a vehicle or a hot air balloon or a motorcycle or a house. It's really the joy and happiness comes from our relationships, the posterity, the communities. And the goal is to be able to, at least within the digital world, to create value exchange that is real. So how do these different assets go onto this exchange, and how do we access them or use them? And then how do we become a community that can actually thrive within systems, laws that are currently there and available, but really from a technological standpoint of how systems can actually be deployed. And people like Richard Dick, who literally today, he has worked on systems that have already been retired into the Smithsonian. But before he passes away, I promised him literally, I don't know, 11 to about, I guess it was 2010. So well over a decade. We promised him and his wife, which she's amazing as well, but just as brilliant. But we promised them we will take this challenge and we will work hard to be able to give the data back to the individual. Because believe it or not, HIPAA, Health Information and Portability and Privacy Act, was just supposed to do exactly what a lot of these other acts are supposed to do. But when it comes to implementing it from a technological standpoint, that's where it's missed. And that's where the clear companies focused on really being service providers to the digital world. And what I'm gonna pull open, I'm actually gonna pull open the digital world. So for those that may be new, the digital world basically has different councils that enable different questions, and then people vote on different services. And then the services have different providers. Now, when we jump into the providers, the clear companies are just a couple of the different providers. There'll be a lot more that will plug in over time, right? So I hope you can kind of get a vision if this might be the first time you're tying into this. But any questions or thoughts or comments, I'm going to go ahead and open the time up to the audience, and we will go ahead and go through. Actually, I'll pull over the audience here. Anybody?
You got a question there, Michael, just going back to the Cowboy Ranch, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Clear Homes, do you envisage that Clear Homes might provide some of the housing on the Cowboy Ranch, and how would you get into that?
You know, that's a great question. And for those of you that might not be aware, there's a couple different Clear companies. This is actually a team that is independent from any of the technology. The payments and the reputation and the credit models for financing is really where the value comes in. This is actually a technology that is using rails and SIP panels to create different pre-built homes. You do them digitally and then you do them physically with robotics. It's amazing technology. And there's actually a facility that's going in Utah. And the actual, you can kind of see the technology right here. So it uses this form of rails and SIP panels to actually build it. But the first factory's here in Utah, and then we'll be building some of these homes. And today the approval for some of these different models to be built, for instance, this is actually one that's built for that type of environment. This is actually a lower end home. 2 residents can actually fit in this home, and all of the different elements come built in, whether it's the floor, the walls, the ceilings. They actually are built out of the same materials. They just have a different finish to them, and they're delivered, and there's really no waste. The time to put it up is a couple weeks instead of a couple quarters, if not more. But this is actually what they call an ADU. It's got 2 different levels to it. It's more of a, this was actually designed for that same type of environment. We don't have green lights. The folks that are building the homes, you know, there's a conversation that is starting to weave this in, but this isn't my personal responsibility and governance, so to speak. There's some wonderful teams that are brilliant behind this. Carl and many others on his team, but this technology ties into a coin called Homes, as well as an asset called aluminum. And so some of the thoughts are, how can we actually enable those 2 different real world applications? For instance, in this area that we talk about with some of these homes, you know, the average price per square foot, there was even a home just sold a couple weeks ago. It's like $800 to $900 per square foot sold. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. That's not a fair comparison. But when we look at these homes, they can actually be delivered for about $240 per square foot. That includes all the robotics, all the margins, all the build out, all of the different infrastructure to get it there, and all of the elements. I think it comes with almost everything but, you know, the sheets and those types of things. So this is something that is targeted for those environments. And so, yes, having a holistic community that basically is using, the real key is around the financing, around the reputation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over here. I'm going to go to the services. I'm going to click on reputation. The individual has their own reputation. The organization or the business or the community or the ranch, etc., would actually have its own reputation. And then the asset, so maybe a home, and then the currency that would actually use to pay for it could also have its own value there. That's the real value that the digital world plays into a community, kind of like this digital ranch that we're talking about, where you can actually have, you know, different communities that are actually leveraging this kind of payments. So imagine throughout this whole system, by the way, what if there's like a Marriott that's in here, and you can use Marriott reward points, which are cryptographic. You can also tie those and exchange those into other things. Maybe it's gold, maybe it's silver, maybe it's a card that you actually pop out of an ATM, if you will. So you can actually convert Marriott reward points right onto a card that, let's say you want to go and buy something outside of this community that just uses normal fiat. And what's crazy is a lot of the fiat systems are going away, and that's how people are going to get forced into this. Many people may think, you know, Mike, you're just talking about la la land stuff. I've actually heard that over the years, like people just don't understand it. But when I'm going to go through and actually find another video when we wrap up here, and you can kind of see it real time. So, but I hope without, I know I'm not answering your question directly, because to be honest with you, we don't have approval for the Clear Homes to go into this environment. but that is something that we're talking potential about, especially down in these lots here. So these are all kind of smaller lots that those would be perfect on. There are some higher end homes. So this particular home, the homes range between 450 square feet on up to 3,800 square feet. And a lot of the homes in some of the higher end environments are actually a little bit more than that. This is another one that was architected for that same type of environment. Again, you'll notice the SIP panels, the rails, and some of the other things that you'll see is when you look at some of these environments, what else do you have? Well, I won't even go into it now, but there's a lot of other things around being decentralized. It's not just the identity and the payments, but it's around being truly self-sovereign and self-sustaining and independent. Like, what if you could actually heat these homes and power these homes, and the sewage systems are all independent, like they're totally independent environments at a fraction of the existing building costs that are out there in the world. So with that being said, I hope I've without giving you a direct answer, because your question is absolutely brilliant, but we don't have green lights on that yet. So other thoughts or questions? Does that make sense to you, Adam, by the way?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you're all lined up and ready to go, but you're crossing the finish line by the sounds of it.
Exactly. Other questions or comments or thoughts or feedback?
Yeah, I have a question, Michael. So when you talk reputation, is it based on the activities in a particular company or individual as we transact with our integrity and honesty, et cetera, we build our reputation? Is that what you mean by reputation?
Yeah. So today there's a reputation. I know that you're from Canada, and I know the prior caller question was from New Zealand, but in America, there's a credit system. And I personally believe that the American dream is not the ability to actually own a house. It's the ability to get the credit to buy a house. And that credit system evolved over the years. Today, the centralized credit systems with TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian is known as a FICO score, which TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian are the ones that track the data. The FICO score is actually tied from a system from a guy named Fair and Isaacs, two different people that came together that said, hey, if people actually pay their bills on time and have this type of history and do these types of things, they can actually get a credit rating between this and this. Well,
right.
In this environment, it does similar type things, but it actually goes a lot deeper. For instance, it gives the ability for the individual to say, you know what, I don't want them to have this data, or I'm willing to actually share this data, but not in a full form, not in a meta form, I don't want them to know where I am, but I'll let them know that I'm moving around with a GPS. And I move this type of frequency and this type of rate, but they don't need to know physically where I am. Or that I send text messages, but they don't need to know who I'm texting. Or that I have certain photos, or I've taken photos and I have certain data that's with me. All of these things are different proof points, and all of them can be weighted by the individual. They can also be weighted by the creditor. So the individual or organizations that's issuing the credit, they can also say, I'm going to use this decentralized system to actually say, I want to weight it. Like, I don't care if someone has moves around with their phone, but I care if they authenticate off of a bank account, or I care if they're validated with an education in a certain system. And so all of these things basically tie to it. The things around businesses tie to how many individuals are actually on. So you can have multiple members within a business, a decentralized business. You can have multiple assets, and the more these assets are transacted and the more an individual transact, the higher the reputation score. So the simple answer to your question is yes. The more that it's utilized, the earlier they've been in, all of that matters. And so I believe in time, when people can actually buy a home or buy a car or buy a phone or buy a cellular service, they'll have the ability to actually pay for them with these types of systems. And when they start doing that and they can actually start living, they can start growing food or buying food or being a part of these systems, which, by the way, there's going to be a value of all the different vendors that come into it. So for instance, if I come back over and I go through, I'm going to look at the Pacific Union, because the Pacific Union has this DDPR law that's built into it, and it actually looks at different types of vendors. So for instance, if an airline actually accepts a decentralized identity and maybe decentralized payments or rewards or the dispute resolution, they should have the opportunity to have more people come to them. Or maybe it's a hotel, or maybe it's a cruise. But the point that I'm driving at is if they accept identity and payments, who wouldn't accept identity? For instance, Marriott, hundreds of millions of dollars they have to pay because they have customer data in their servers, which is a liability. Why don't you just take the data out and say, you know what, we like if someone's a felon, can they stay in their hotel? They don't discriminate against that. If someone's this race or that race, they don't discriminate. But what they do is they need to say, hey, the reservation connects with this identity, and we're going to get paid. So if you can use a decentralized identity that actually verifies in a much more cryptographic, secured way, and then the payments you can see that they're going to get paid or they get paid, or if they want to get it refunded, all the accounting, all the reporting, everything is there. It's so beautiful. So imagine a system where people can move around. By the way, imagine that digital community that actually has a digital hotel that pays the number one type of payment is actually a digital payment. The number one type of identity is actually a digital identity. And then go throughout the world. You know, you want to buy a vehicle, you want to use a service. There's tons of different capabilities for these different environments to basically work. So reputation and how it's used is really going to be a massively important part of the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of answers, but the other part is, does the reputation in any way, does it reflect the quality of the product, the service, just the integrity of not only on the payment side, but the integrity of the company? So let's say I want to purchase something from company ABC online. Well, is there a way that the reputation could reflect whether they're trustworthy, whether they're going to actually send me the product, whether the product is going to be of any quality? Like, is there anything in the reputation that reflects any of those aspects?
That's a really brilliant question. The actual assets themselves can actually go so I'll show you an example.
But not just the assets, Michael. I'm also talking about the level of service. Let's say you're in more of a service, like a restaurant. Let's say, is the food good? Is the service good? Are they overpriced? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally, absolutely. It ties to reputation. So inside of the digital world, and many folks may not realize this, but there's actually what's called a dispute resolution system. And the dispute resolution system, if someone actually has a problem, so let's say that someone actually took a car ride or they got a hotel room and there was actually a dead body in the mattress in the hotel room, right? So there's a real problem, like a real problem. And they said, not only do we want our money back, but we've got some emotional whatever. So not only could they create some type of a case, like a class action suit where you can have lots of people that come in, and it could be a public suit, like these are all real suits, or it could be a private suit, right? So not just a legal case with one party to another party in the jurisdiction of the digital world, but it could even go outside the digital world, which is a whole nother conversation around how legal claims can actually be done. But the point is if there's a dispute or there's a problem, someone can actually raise it and create a forum where people can work through the resolution, and it's actually using real time. A piece of this uses AI, a piece of this uses amazing folks that actually come together with technology, but they can actually use people that say, you know what, we're professional arbitrators. We care about resolving problems. We're not judges in a certain jurisdiction, but this individual has ABC and XYZ history, blah, blah, blah. But the net is the people that have the dispute can actually get it resolved quickly. And if there's an issue where someone says, you know what, I'm still not going to pay even after that, that's when the reputation can actually be hit. But it needs to be done in such a way where literally you take out the centralized emotion and you let technology from an intelligently organized process help humanity, not govern humanity. Individuals should be governing themselves, assuming that people actually have some basic virtues and some basic things. But that ties back to really the Declaration. And for those that are not aware, there's a structure behind the purpose of what this whole system in the digital world is for. It's for individuals to actually govern themselves, but we're assuming they're going to keep basic laws there. Why? The digital world doesn't have force of law. There's no sheriff. There's no policing system, etc. There's no military. It is a matter of people coming together and saying the reputation actually matters. So you as an individual, you actually wear this reputation. You actually would say, you know, if the service is really a 4.8, I'm really going to really see it that way. Why? Because this system can't be manipulated like so many other systems. Like there's so many systems out there in the world where you can just hire people to just do unlimited reviews. Well, that's not going to happen in this type of system. I can't say to the same level, but does that make more sense?
So I could, in effect, you know, look up a business, and before I, you know, either, purchase their service or their item, I could just go on and check and see, you know, if there are any complaints, or if there's any, I could look at the reputation and see, and that would reflect the integrity of that business.
That's exactly right. That's not something that we've done today. It is modeled within some of the social platforms. There's a large social community app that has, like, think about everything from Airbnb down to the ability to get a job, to the ability to actually just make a social post, all the way over to getting a ride somewhere. You know, the same things that we do in life, it basically ties to, are you going to pay them and are you going to identify? You know, in so many cases, it's like, hey, I just got a ride from Lyft and they just know, the driver just knows my first name and knows that they're going to get paid. But the system behind it knows a lot. And I'm not going into the conspiracy theory side of it. All I'm going to say is the reality around identities being centralized, payments being centralized, and AI wrapping all of that, whether through health or some other means, that is slavery waiting to happen for the future.
Oh, there's no doubt, Michael. I love your system, everything about it. And just even, you know, I just look at what just accounting departments and legal departments and in big companies, I mean, you solve all of those issues in real time. Everything's done in real time. The cost savings must be astronomical, and just the ease and anyway, the efficiency. I love everything about this. You know, I can't imagine people that would not want to adopt this.
I'm sure there'll be people that just, they don't care, they don't get it, they don't want it, they don't, you know, but I'm like you. I really believe there needs to be a choice for future generations. One of the things that we love about the different entities within the Pacific Ocean, whether Polynesian, Melanesian, Micronesian, and whether over, you know, part of the 25,000 islands, this thing makes up half the earth, literally. And some of the countries inside of it, namely Fiji. So there was actually the same type of thing with Marriott and a couple other environments around a pilot. They have what's called the superannuation fund inside of Fiji, which is like Social Security in America. And so imagine if health and the trust fund, which is actually, because like 71% of the land is still owned by the country themselves. But imagine if the trust funds, the Social Security funds, and the actual taxes could all be paid all at the same time at checkout. And there's actually a pilot within the Fijian country of actually doing that, which is But what we're talking about here with this digital community, which is not closed, this is not completed, but imagine a community that is truly private. They own the land, they own the roads, they own the sewage. They even built a freaking $2 million fire department and then gave it away to be private, to be able to transact in such a way that can set an example for future generations, that other communities can be modeled after, that other states can actually understand this is a legislation for identity, for payments, and for the ability to transact, excuse me, it's right here, or to be able to actually take your data and reshape and mold it. But one of the other things I wanted to show you is around cars. And this is not live yet, but there's a whole beautiful service that's coming out that ties to the future of cars. Imagine a car like, so we have Kelley Blue Book or some of these other things that actually rate cars. But what if you could go in and actually select a different car and have a rating on it based upon the history? So for instance, they're saying, you know, these types of Teslas, this Model 3 or Model Y, they're going to get 500,000 to 1 million miles out of it. That's a different animal than the existing cars. But how do you know that they haven't had some crazy issue to them? And I believe reputation can tie to assets just like cars, just like currencies and everything else. And it's really a very, very simple model that's very scalable and duplicatable. So other questions or thoughts or comments before we wrap up today? I'll give just 2 more seconds and then I'll play a video as we wrap up. If you want to see it, if not, I'll put it in the notes as well.
Okay, one more question, Michael.
Go ahead.
So I'm in Canada, not that I want to stay here. I'm looking at moving from here, but this might be a really silly question, but how could I start my own community? How do you go about that?
The same way that I kind of showed you here. Remember how we logged in and we actually grabbed, let's go back into organizations. Let's go to business. Let's go create a business. You can actually create a community right there. And then
no, but I'm talking like the Utah, like the ranch community, like an actual physical community.
You know, this stuff that we're looking at here is actually just a massive blessing. You know, it's a group of people that actually cared about privacy and created a private membership association with their own private infrastructure. And then some people died and some things happened. And the next thing you know, a gentleman that's been researching it for a year that knows me from, you know, a decade or 2 ago, calls up and says, Mike, I'm in my 70s and I really don't know what you're doing, but I believe it's true. And I believe it's the future.
Right.
And I just spent $50 million on this ranch, and you're supposed to get on this stage and you're supposed to tell the world about what you're doing. And not only that, you're supposed to help all the companies and the communities and the different projects in this digital world to get on this digital stage and to tell the world, to literally communicate to the world in such a unique way. And I don't know if I've got any images up. I don't think I do, but communicate in such a unique way that people really get it. And it's just unfolding. And I'm sure that it'll happen the way that it's supposed to happen. But just like it happens here, Danielle, it can happen in your own backyard, wherever that may be, whether that's in Canada or another part of the world. People are going to finally figure out that, you know what, these power lines that connect us, that we think we have to have the power, they're really not needed. This internet connection that we think we have to have, it's really not needed. All of this stuff is actually natural through the air. It's real. And so that would be the simple answer around being able to literally start your own environment based upon that. You ready?
So when you finally do go on stage, will you let us know so we can participate?
Well, one of the goals is to actually get this to a point where we have a question that can be asked so that you guys can all say, hey, we support this or we don't support it. And we really need a proactive, shoot holes in it. If there's something that's negative, something that's concerning, because a lot of this stuff is just too good to be true on one hand. On the other hand, it's like, why wouldn't you? But I do think that having lots of people that actually think different ways and come from different cultures, them actually saying, let's do this a different way, or think about it a different way. the statistics are there. You know, if you get more people that actually care about this, a similar topic, if they can have a voice and be heard, which is really what the elections and electoral voting and all this stuff was supposed to do, but it's all busted. But in the
Right.
digital world, the voting is actually resolved. It truly is resolved. So, you know, you'll have, right now we don't have any questions. The biggest thing that we need to focus on, which I'll share this document, is really around this document here. You know, the digital world adopting the Digital Choice Act that's within Utah, you know, going through this is just a draft, but literally going through this and actually tying it to some of the other technologies. So this goes through the different technologies. So we're actually implementing policy with technology and rolling it out. And that's the biggest thing that people are just missing. They just don't, that's where the rubber doesn't meet the road, because the people that legislate and create the laws don't understand the tech, and vice versa. But if we can actually build these models that can tie it together, I believe that there's something that is just massively unique. So other questions or thoughts?
You're brilliant, Michael, and I just thank the universe for having you in my life.
No, it goes two ways. And I'm grateful. This week, I just want to say that I'm grateful for John and Adam for doing what they're doing, because what they're doing is going to impact future generations like we cannot even explain. Like, wrap up everything that I've said, times it by 10, put a nice little bow on it. And I know they may not know in their own little respective spheres, but as it comes together, the work that they're doing, the feelings, the thoughts, the impact, the energy that they're putting into it is going to make a massive difference. So I would just say kudos to Adam and to John on this week of June, what are we at? 17th, 2025. So,
And I double that. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, John.
much love, everybody. I'll go ahead and post, I'm going to go ahead and post this. I'm going to go ahead and post this for everybody to see on this one. If you guys want to watch it as we wrap up, there's that. And then we'll say goodbye and see you all next week. Much love, everybody.
Aloha.
Aloha.